cattle were running the wrong way, 340 longhorns, spooked by a lightning strike not a quarter-mile off, streaming back up the coulee in a churning wall of horn and hide, and every man on the Kessler payroll was chasing them on horseback in the dark, hollering themselves hoarse. Orla Crane stood at the mouth of the draw on foot, her hat brim shedding rain, watching the whole mess unspool. She did not holler. She listened. She counted the rhythm of hooves, felt the shift in the wind, and walked, not ran, walked, to the left flank of the herd where the pressure had broken, where the led animals were still hunting for open ground. She moved at an angle to their path, cutting, not chasing, and she spoke low into the dark, a sound that was not exactly a word and was not exactly a whistle, but the nearest longhorn on the left swung its head toward her. Then the next. Then the whole flank began to curve like a slow river bending around a sandbar. And the leaders followed, and inside of 4 minutes the herd was moving north again, back toward the bed ground, and Orla Crane was standing in the middle of a wet pasture with mud to her boot tops, watching 340 animals she had never met before settle like they had always known where they were going. Thomas Kessler saw it from the ridge. He had been ranching for 19 years, and he had never seen anything like it. He sat his horse in the rain and watched until the last of the herd disappeared onto the bed ground, and even then he sat there a moment longer, listening to the thunder moving east and the cattle murmurs settling into the dark. He put his horse down the slope at a walk and rode over to where she stood. The rain had eased to a cold drizzle. She was wringing water from her braid, wringing it the way you wring out a rag, methodical and unhurried. She did not look up. "Can you run a herd?" he said. It was not quite a question, and it was not quite a statement. It was the thing between them, the real thing, said out loud at last. She looked at him then. Her eyes were the color of winter grass, pale and steady, and without apology. "I just did," she said. "If this story is already reaching something in you, I would be grateful if you hit that subscribe button and dropped a like before we go further. And leave me a comment telling me what town or state you are watching from. I love to see how far these stories travel." The town of Copper Bend, Montana sat at the edge of a wide grass valley in the autumn of 1873, the kind of place where a hard winter could take 300 head and leave a man with nothing but debt and a prayer he had already stopped believing in. The Bitterroot Range stood to the west, already white at the peaks before October was through, and the sky those weeks had a pewter weight to it that the old-timers read as a sign of early snow, the kind that comes in fast and stays. Thomas Kessler had come to Copper Bend 9 years prior, trailing a borrowed herd and a borrowed saddle, and a determination that had nothing romantic in it, just the flat, practical kind that gets a man out of bed before light and keeps him working until the dark comes back. By the autumn in question, he had built the Ridgeline outfit into one of the better operations in the valley. 4,000 acres of deeded grass, a solid barn, a stone main house he was finishing room by room as money allowed. He had a foreman named Dale Pruitt who was capable and not foolish, a cook named Amos whose biscuits could be used to shim fence posts, and a crew of 6 cowboys who were loyal in the ways that counted. What he did not have, coming into the weeks before the fall drive, was a trail boss. His previous man, a weather-beaten Texan named Stokes, had ridden into a fence post in the dark 2 months ago and broken 3 ribs and his collarbone and one of his 2 front teeth. Stokes was alive and healing in town and deeply philosophical about the whole matter, which Thomas appreciated, but the fall drive was 6 weeks out and 230 miles of broken Montana country stood between the Ridgeline herd and the railhead at Clearwater Junction. Orla Crane had come to Copper Bend from somewhere no one quite agreed on. She was 29 years old, and she had been a widow for 14 months, the kind of widow the town had decided about before she had unpacked her kit. Her husband, a drover named Court Crane, had died of a fever outside Billings the previous winter, which was a plain misfortune, but the story that had spread ahead of her was not plain. People said Court Crane had been a decent man led astray by a wife who would not keep a proper house or a proper manor, who had dragged him across half the territory chasing drives when a man needed his roots down, who had worked him to early death and taken nothing from the lesson. Orla had not heard all of this when it was said. She had heard enough. She had come back to Copper Bend, where she and Court had wintered 2 seasons before, because she knew the valley And because she had no direction that pulled harder, she had $40, a blue roan mare named Sable, the cattle management text she had carried since she was 18, and the kind of quiet that settles on a person after they have lost something big and decided not to fall apart over it. The boarding house where she rented a room was run by Hazel Pryor, a woman of great certainty and narrow sympathy who made her feelings about Orla known through a system of small, cold courtesies and pointed silences. The other boarders, 2 merchants and a schoolteacher, avoided the topic of Orla Crane the way you avoid a hole in a bridge plank, carefully and without drawing attention to the avoidance. Orla ate breakfast early and supper late, and spent the hours between looking for work. She found it where she could, and it kept leaving her. 3 days mending fence for the Alderson outfit until Cal Alderson's wife presented him with the kind of quiet, sustained argument that a man with any sense learns to take seriously. A week at Bjorn's livery with a difficult Roman-nosed gelding that had already put 2 men down, until the neighbors started making remarks. Half a day helping the widow Dunmore get her spring wagon out of a ditch, which did not pay but which needed doing and nobody else was stopping. She was not good at asking for help, and she was not going to beg for work. So she kept her accounts tight and her pride to herself, and she read the cattle text in the evenings until the lamp oil ran low. It was Bjorn who mentioned her to Thomas Kessler. Thomas had come back from Billings to find Stokes in a sling in the drive in question, and he was moving through the known possibilities with the systematic patience of a man checking fence line, eliminating each one as he came to it. Bjorn was on his list because Bjorn knew everyone who moved through town, and most of what they could do. He sat across from Bjorn in the livery office with a cup of coffee going cold between his hands, and listened to the Swede describe what he had watched Orla do with that gelding, a big animal with a ruined history and no trust left in it. How she had taken 3 days with it doing nothing but getting the horse used to her smell, her voice, her stillness, before she ever put a hand to it, and then when she did, how the horse had come to her instead of away, and how by the end of the week the gelding was carrying a saddle, and beginning to understand that the world might not always be trying to kill it. Thomas asked a few questions. He asked them the way he checked his accounts, without skipping anything. Then he went to find her. She was in the back of the livery where the hay was stacked, sitting on a bale with the cattle text open on her knee, and a tin cup of coffee on the edge of a stall rail, cold by the color of it. "You are Court Crane's widow," he said. She looked up. Her expression did not shift in the way that word sometimes made women's expressions shift. The bracing of something. "That was right," she said. He pulled up a 3-legged stool without being invited, which she registered but did not remark on, and he asked her where she had trailed cattle and how long and in what capacity. She told him without adornment. Wyoming, 2 drives, as a hand on the first and second drover on the second, working the left flank on a mixed herd of 1,500 head across 120 miles of country that had almost no water in its middle third and required creative route finding to get through without losing animals. Kansas with Court, 300 miles of flint and grass, a drive that had gone well until it had not, and then recovered because they had read the weather right and got ahead of it. Texas 1 season, a supplementary drive to a feedlot at the end of a hard year. Nothing remarkable about it except that she had been 22, and it had been her idea, and Court had agreed to it even though he had his doubts, and it had worked. She did not tell him any of this proudly. She told it the way you tell a man your qualifications when he has asked for them, precisely and without theater. He listened the way she suspected he listened to most things, with his full attention and no interruption. Then he said, "I have got a fall drive in 6 weeks, and no trail boss. 230 miles to Clearwater Junction." She closed the text on her knee. She did not say anything, waiting for the rest of it. 372 head, he said. Mixed. Longhorns mostly, a run of mixed breeds. Good weight on them from the summer grass. I need them in at Clearwater by the 23rd of October, or I eat the delay penalty. Orla did the arithmetic. 6 weeks to prepare. 22 driving days on the outside to make that deadline given the terrain she knew was between here and the junction. "I am also told the town does not think well of you," he said. He did not say it harshly or with apology either. He said it the way you mention weather before a drive, as a thing to account for. She tilted her head at him, the way you tilt your head at an honest man. The town does not think well of a lot of things, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Can you run a herd?" It came out plain and direct, the same tone he had used for everything else, like asking if she could read a tally sheet. "Yes," she said. He nodded once, settling something in himself. "I will pay trail boss wages," he said, "plus a quarter share of the delivery bonus if you bring them in inside 22 days. She looked across the aisle at Sable in her stall, the roan's ears swiveling toward the sound of her voice. "I will need to meet your crew before I say yes," she said. "That was fair," he said. She stood and offered her hand, and he shook it once, firmly, and he did not look at her hand afterward the way some men looked, verifying it, making sure it was real. He just shook it and let go. The crew had views. Dale Pruitt kept his to himself with the professional discretion of a man who had learned that the first opinions in a new arrangement were almost always the ones you regretted. He was steady and capable, and he had more experience with Montana winters than with long drives, and he knew the latter and managed it by being useful instead of proud. He showed Orla the supply inventory without being asked on the first morning, and she thanked him for it, and they got along from there. The Dodd brothers, Rafe and Clem, were 24 and 22, and had come up from Texas the previous spring following word of better range wages in the north. They were good hands in the field, and they were honest enough to say what they were thinking. On the morning of the second day of preparations, when Orla rode out to the south pasture to walk the herd, Rafe pulled up alongside her and said what he was thinking. "Mom," he said. He held his horse steady, and his tone was not disrespectful, just direct. "I do not have anything against you personally, but I have never trailed under a woman, and I do not rightly know how it was supposed to work." Orla was looking at the herd below them on the grass, reading body condition the way she always read it, moving her eye across the animals the way you move a hand across a surface, looking for rough spots. "You ride point and swing where I put you," she said. "You water when I say water. You bed when I say bed. You know the night guard rotation, and you are up for yours." She paused. "If you see something I need to know, you come tell me straight. Same as any other drive." Rafe looked at his brother. Clem was watching the herd below, and appeared to find it more interesting than the conversation. "Yes, ma'am," Rafe said. Orla touched Sable's flank and moved down toward the pasture and did not look back. The fourth hand of consequence was Tuck Harlow. Tuck Harlow was 45 years old, and had been on cattle drives since the era when drives were still working out the basic theory of themselves. And he carried with him the settled certainty of a man whose methods had been tested by long experience and found sufficient. He was not a cruel man. He was not at his core an unfair one. But he had a picture in his mind of how cattle driving worked and who did which parts of it, and Orla did not fit the picture, and the picture mattered to him. He did not say this to Orla. He said it in the bunkhouse in the evenings, in the sidelong way that men say things when they want the words to travel without leaving a clear trail back to themselves. The words traveled as they always did, and Thomas heard them through the indirect channels of ranch life. A thing Amos the cook mentioned, a thing Dale Pruitt said with careful neutrality. Thomas listened and said nothing and watched. What he watched in those preparatory weeks was a woman doing the work of the job she had been given, without asking for acknowledgement and without angling for it. She mapped the first 5 days of the route on paper, cross-referencing with a county survey map she had borrowed from Bjorn. And then she rode the first 20 miles of it herself, to check 2 water sources that the map showed, but that she wanted to verify with her own eyes. The first was still good, a spring-fed creek running clear. The second had gone alkaline over the summer, and she found another source, half a mile east of it, and added it to the route. She spent 2 evenings with Dale Pruitt going over the supply list, and by the end of the second evening Dale had lost the careful watchfulness he had started with, and was talking to her the way he talked to Thomas, directly, and without the slight holding back that a man uses with a person he is still deciding about. She noticed this and said nothing about it. She checked every horse in the remuda. She found 2 with shoeing problems, and arranged for the blacksmith to come out. And she was in the barn when he did it, watching, asking questions about the feet that the blacksmith answered with more respect than he had planned to. Because the questions were good ones, she checked the supply wagon and found a wheel rim working loose on the right front and got it fixed. She reviewed the contingency plan with Amos for what happened if the drive was delayed beyond the crossing at Elk River, which was the most likely point of delay given the season, and she left Amos with a written list of what to do in each scenario, which he folded carefully into his shirt pocket and consulted twice in the weeks that followed. Thomas watched all of this from a careful middle distance, not hovering and not absent. He was aware that he was doing more watching than was strictly required by the management of his own property. And he was also aware that he did not intend to stop. The day before the drive left, he came to the barn where she was doing her final check of the saddle packs. The lantern was lit against the early dark, and Sable was standing in the cross ties with the patience of a horse that has been through a lot of preparations and knows they are precursor to the work it loves. "Is there anything else you need from me?" he said. She paused in what she was doing and looked at him over Sable's back. The lantern swung slightly in a draft from the door he had left open, and the light moved across her face. "Just have the pens ready when we get in," she said. "I will," he said. She turned back to the saddle pack, checking a buckle. He stood in the doorway another moment. The barn smelled of hay and horse and the cold that had come in with him from outside. And the lantern said what lanterns say in old barns, that this is a serious place where serious work happens, and the dark outside is the frame that makes the light matter. He went inside. He did not entirely understand what he was feeling, but he understood it was something, and he let it be what it was. The drive left on a Tuesday in the second week of October. The air cold and sharp as glass. Frost on the grass. The herd's breath rising in the blue pre-dawn light. Orla rode point with Sable beneath her. The blue roan quick and quiet-footed, and she set the pace at 12 miles for the first day. Easy enough for the cattle to settle into the movement without pushing them off their feet. The herd moved well. The ground was good, the grass short enough that the footing was firm, the sky clearing by mid-morning to a hard winter blue. Rafe Dodd rode right swing and Clem rode left. Dale Pruitt was on left flank. 3 other hands, young men named Whitmore and Briggs, and a taciturn Montanan everyone called Sunday, covered the remaining positions. Tuck Harlow rode drag, which was the dust position, the punishment position, the position that said what the man riding it thought about his standing in the current arrangement. He rode it without complaint, and he did his job without fault. And by the end of the first day the cattle were bedded, and the camp was up, and the night guard rotation was set, and Orla had covered 12 miles and not lost an animal. The second day the wind came in from the north, and the cattle felt it and grew restless with it. That edgy sideways pressure that a herd gets when the weather is changing and they know it before the sky tells you. Orla rode the flank for most of 6 hours, keeping her position between the animals and the open country to the south where they wanted to drift, giving them just enough containment to hold the line without crowding them into panic. It required patience and the ability to read each animal's movement not as a singular thing but as part of the whole pattern of the herd, the way you read a river by watching where the water goes. She had been doing this since she was 16 years old, and her father had taken her on her first drive in Wyoming, and it was as natural to her as reading a room. They covered 13 miles. No strays. On the third day one of the mixed-breed steers came up lame during the noon break, a stone bruise on the right fore, bad enough that he was 3-legged at the walk. Rafe Dodd rode up to where Orla was checking the lead cattle and told her his recommendation, which was to cut the steer and leave it. Orla stepped down from Sable and looked at the foot herself, cleaning it out with the pick she carried on her belt, reading the bruise, reading the angle of the leg, reading how the steer was distributing its weight. She looked at the sky and the country ahead. There was a good water crossing 4 miles on, she said. Flat grass on the other side. He'll do 4 miles at a walking pace if we put him on your outside, where he was not getting jostled. Rafe looked at the steer. He looked at the country. He was doing the arithmetic she had already done. And after the crossing, she said, "The ground is soft grass, not gravel. He'll get some relief in it. Give him till tomorrow morning. If he was worse, we cut him then." Rafe said, "Yes, ma'am." She was right about the crossing and right about the grass, and in the morning the steer was still sore but moving, and by midday he was back in the flow of the herd like he knew where he belonged. Clem Dodd, who had been watching all of this from his flank position, told his brother at the next camp that he had understood she knew what she was doing since the first day, and he was glad Rafe had figured it out too. Rafe said he had taken a little longer to come around, and he was not especially proud of that. The days accumulated the way days on a trail drive accumulate, through work and weather and the small emergencies that are the texture of moving animals across a distance. There was a river crossing on the 8th day that ran higher than the maps had shown, and Orla took the time to ride the crossing twice before she committed the herd to it, picking a line that kept the lead cattle in the shallowest water, and let the drag come through before the current had a chance to push anything sideways. They lost no cattle in the crossing and came out on the far side onto a bench of good grass, and Orla called an early stop to let them graze and recover. There was a stretch of 3 days beginning on the 11th that had cloud cover and cold that sat in the bones and did not lift. A miserable riding kind of cold that is worse than cold with wind because there is nothing to brace against. The hands rode in it and said little and did their work, and Orla rode it the same, and the cattle moved because they were moved, and the miles went under them. On the 12th day the sky cleared and the sun came back, pale and thin and welcome, and Whitmore started singing in the afternoon, something from Tennessee that no one else knew the words to but that had a good rhythm for riding. And by the time the camp was up that evening, the mood of the drive had shifted back to the comfortable monotony of work going right. Thomas would not know the specifics of most of this until later. When she told him in the matter-of-fact way, she told him most things. What he knew during the drive was nothing and everything, which is what a man knows when he has put a piece of something important into another person's hands, and has to trust the hands. He worked the ranch. He fixed the east fence line with Sunday's younger brother, who was a fixture on the ridgeline crew and bore a strong enough resemblance to his sibling that it was briefly disorienting. He made arrangements with the Clearwater Junction pens by letter, setting the arrival window and the penalty terms and the bonus structure. He had the books in order for the month of October by the 2nd week. He found himself checking the calendar in the evenings with more frequency than was useful. On the evening of the 14th day, a rider came up the road with a letter. The trouble had arrived on the 14th morning, 3 days out from Clearwater Junction. It came in the form of a man named Virgil Cass, who ran cattle on the eastern range and had made it his business for 2 years to maneuver smaller outfits off the grass he wanted. Virgil Cass did not operate in the open. He employed men who showed up at inconvenient moments with papers that were constructed to look legal and to feel expensive to dispute. He had successfully turned 2 smaller outfits off contested range in the previous season, and the impression in the valley was that he would keep expanding until someone stopped him. And stopping him required the kind of money and patience that most operations could not sustain. 2 of his men rode up to the herd on the 14th morning from the east, and the larger of them, a big man with a flat face and a practiced air of regret, told Orla that the next 12 miles of grass were under a grazing lease, and the herd needed to turn south and find another route. The southern route added 4 days. It also required a river crossing she had already heard was running dangerous. Orla took the papers and read them. She took her time. The herd was moving at a walk behind her, and the Dodd brothers had pulled up to watch, and Tuck Harlow had ridden up from drag, which told her the rear of the herd was settled enough to leave for a moment. The papers were grazing lease notices on grass adjacent to the road. They were not trespass orders. The distinction was the whole matter. "These are lease notices on the range grass," she said. She handed them back. "They do not restrict passage on the county road and the right-of-way alongside it." That was public land. "Well, stay on the right-of-way." The big man held the papers and looked at her with the expression of a man who had expected this to go differently and was deciding what the next step was. Mr. Kessler might want to reconsider the quality of representation he was sending on a drive this important, the man said. His companion had his hand near but not on his belt, standing easy in the stirrups with the practiced negligence of someone trying to suggest that violence was possible, without actually threatening it. "I am not representation," Orla said. Her voice was level. "I am a trail boss with 300 head to move and a legal right-of-way to use. If you want to dispute that, you can do it in front of the county clerk." She gathered Sable's reins. "Excuse me." She turned and rode back to the herd and did not look back. She signaled Dale Pruitt on the left flank and Rafe on the right, and they set the cattle moving at a steady pace along the road corridor. The 2 men sat their horses and watched the drive pass, and did not move. Tuck Harlow pulled up alongside her as the tail of the herd went through. He looked at her for a moment with the measuring look of a man checking something he has been measuring for a while. "That was well handled," he said. He said it the way he said everything, with a flatness that was not unfriendly, just the verbal economy of a man who did not spend words on things he did not mean. "Thank you, Tuck," she said. He touched his hat brim and went back to drag. That night she wrote Thomas a letter at the portable writing desk she carried in her kit, a small hinged board of her own making, sanded smooth, that fit across her knees when she sat cross-legged in her bedroll. She reported the encounter with Cass's men in 2 paragraphs. What they had said, what she had said, the legal basis, the outcome. She reported that the drive was on schedule. She sent it with the night rider who carried mail along the Territory Road and went to sleep. Thomas read it at midnight at his kitchen table. He had seen the lantern coming up the road and met the rider at the gate, which told him something about how he had been spending his evenings. He read the letter twice. He sat with it in the lamplight. Outside, the wind was coming off the mountains with the sound it makes when the first serious cold is moving in from the north. A long, clear tone, steady and cold, and without particular concern for any of the things that humans are concerned about. He thought about her sitting at her field desk in the dark 3 days out from Clearwater, writing a letter that assumed he could be trusted with facts and expected nothing from him but to receive them. He folded the letter and put it in his breast pocket and went to bed. He was at Clearwater Junction when the herd came in. He had ridden out the day before and camped at the junction, which was a thing he told himself he was doing to have the pens ready as she had asked, and which was also a thing he was doing because he had run out of patience with waiting at the ranch, and the junction was the end of the waiting. It was the 21st day. The sky was the kind of blue that comes after a storm has passed through and cleaned everything down to its essential nature. A cold, brilliant blue with nothing apologetic in it. And the light had a clarity to it that made the mountains to the west look closer than they were. The junction's pen sat at the edge of a flat bench above the river, the rails of good pine lumber weathered gray, the loading chute solid on its foundations. He heard the herd before he saw it, that low, broad sound that a moving herd makes, the sum of 300 bodies moving at a walk, a sound you feel in your chest as much as hear it with your ears. Then they came over the low rise to the south, moving in a column, and Orla was riding point on the blue roan, and the roan was picking her way along the approach lane with the confident ease of a horse at the end of a long job that has been done well. Thomas stood at the pen rail and watched her count the cattle through the gate. She called the numbers to the junction's receiving man, a thin, careful person named Galt, who wrote everything down twice and then checked both copies against each other, and the numbers she called matched the numbers Thomas had sent ahead in the letter. 340 longhorns and 32 mixed breeds, 372 head, all present. 21 days. She swung down from Sable when the last animal was through the gate, and the motion was easy and sure, her boots hitting the ground with the settled confidence of a woman who had been doing this for most of her life. She was thinner through the face than she had been at the start, the way people thin after sustained hard work in cold air, and there was a long mark of dried mud along the left side of her coat, from some crossing he could reconstruct from the letter, and from what he knew of the route. She looked like exactly what she was. She was not trying to look like anything else. She handed Sable to Clem Dodd and walked over to where Galt was checking his tally. Thomas fell in beside her. 372, she said. 21 days. Inside the window, he said. Inside the window, she said. She looked at Galt's tally sheet over the man's shoulder, reading the numbers. Thomas looked at her. He was aware that he had things he wanted to say, and that this was not quite the moment for all of them, and he was also aware that she would know what they were, without him saying them, because she was that kind of person, the kind that reads what is actually there rather than what is announced. "I have got the bonus ready," he said. She nodded. "And I would like to offer you the same job next year," he said, "if you want it." She looked at him. The light was sharp and the mountains were white behind him, and the air had the dry, cold smell of late October in that country. "Same terms," she said. "Better terms," he said. "I will give you a stake in the herd itself, a partnership arrangement on the ridgeline animals going forward." She was quiet. Galt was totaling his columns and making the satisfied small sound that precise men make when the numbers come out right. Around them the cattle were settling into the pens, the longhorns finding their positions in the way that animals find their positions, with mild contention and then acceptance. "You would be taking on a widow the whole town has made up its mind about," she said. It was not complaint or self-pity. It was information, offered as information, the way she offered most things. "The whole town had already made up its mind about me," he said. "I spent 2 years disputing a land survey with men who had decided I had stolen the acreage." He paused. "People decide, then enough things happen that they have to decide again." The corner of her mouth moved. The thing before a smile, the recognition that one was near. "I want to take Sable down to the water before the light goes," she said. "Go ahead," he said. She walked down toward the river with the roan, the horse pressing her soft nose into Orla's shoulder from behind, in the way horses do when they have been with a person long enough to feel the proprietorial ease of affection. And Thomas stood at the pen rail and watched, and did not look away. Tuck Harlow came up beside him at the rail. The old drover stood with his forearms on the top rail, and looked at the cattle settling in the pens, and was quiet for a moment. "Cleanest drive I have seen in 40 years, he said. Thomas looked at him. "I will say that to her face when she comes back up," Tuck said. "Wanted you to know I would say it." Thomas looked back at the river where Orla stood with Sable in the shallows, the horse drinking, the water catching the last of the afternoon light and throwing it back in small pieces. He did not say anything because there was nothing to say that would improve on what was already there. She came back to Copper Bend with the crew in late October, riding in on a Wednesday afternoon when the cottonwoods had dropped their last leaves, and the first real snow was an hour or two out on the western sky, visible as a gray wall where the mountains met the clouds. Word had traveled ahead, the way word traveled in a town that size, which was faster than the rider who carried it and considerably better informed by the time it arrived. The junction's receiving agent had spoken to a freighter who was coming west, and the freighter had spoken to the stableman at the relay post halfway, and the stableman had spoken to a merchant in Copper Bend, he who had told the information to the dry goods counter. And by the time Orla and Thomas and the crew rode down the main street that Wednesday, the street already knew that the Ridgeline Drive had come in at 372 on the 21st day, inside the bonus window, under a trail boss that no outfit in the valley had been willing to hire. Hazel Pryor was on the boardwalk. She was standing outside the notion shop where she had her weekly business, and she watched Orla ride past with the flat look of a person revising something they would have preferred not to revise. Orla did not look at her. She rode to the feed store at the end of the street, and tied Sable at the rail and went inside. Cal Alderson was at the counter. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has done a thing he regrets, and knows he cannot fully undo it, but intends to handle the present better than he handled the past. He nodded to her with a respect that had not been there before. Bjorn the liveryman came around from behind a stack of feed sacks and took both her hands in his big ones and held them, grinning. 372, he said. I heard 372, 21 days, no cattle lost. That was right, she said. He shook his head with a pleasure in it that was genuine, the pleasure of a person who had been right about something they had believed when no one else did. She settled the supply accounts and went back out to the street, where Thomas was talking to Dale Pruitt about the winter pasture rotation, the practical talk of men whose work goes on regardless of what else has happened. Rafe Dodd came out of the feed store behind her and stopped on the step. "Ma'am." She looked back at him. He was standing with his hat in his hands, turning at once. "Just want to say," he said. He said it and stopped, looking for the right words, and apparently deciding the plain ones were right. "Best drive I have ever been on." She looked at him for a moment, and what she felt was something she did not expect. Not pride exactly, though pride was in there somewhere, but the specific warmth of being known by someone who had not expected to know her, and had come to it honestly. "Thank you, Rafe," she said. He nodded and put his hat on and went to his horse. And that was that, as simply and completely as a thing can be finished. Thomas came back to where she stood beside Sable. The first snowflakes were coming down now, light and straight. No wind yet, just the sky releasing something it had been holding. "There was a supper at the house tonight," he said. "For the crew. I would like you to come." She said she would. They rode out together as the snow thickened, the town going soft and quiet behind them, the road going white ahead. Sable walked with the roan's particular loose-limbed ease, her ears forward, reading the air, content in the way that working horses are content when the work has been good, and they are going somewhere familiar. Thomas rode beside her and did not talk much, which she understood to mean that he was a person who did not talk when he did not have anything to add, and she found that restful. After a while she said, "Tuck Harlow came and found me, after the drive came in. Before you did." Thomas said, "What did he say?" Said it was the cleanest drive he had seen in 40 years. Thomas was quiet a moment. "What did you say?" She thought about it. "I said thank you," she said, "and I meant it." He nodded. They rode on. The valley went white and still around them. The bitter roots were gone in the gray, swallowed by the same cloud that was sending the snow, and the road ahead disappeared into it a quarter-mile out, so that it felt as if they were riding into a country that was still being made. The land smelled of cold grass and snow, and the particular clean emptiness that big country smells of when the first storm of the season takes it. Orla thought about the drive. The way you think about a thing when it is behind you, and the distance is enough to see it whole. The 14 days of ordinary difficulty, the 15th with Cass's men, the cold stretch, the river crossing, Rafe Dodd learning to trust her, Tuck Harlow saying what he said. 372 animals in 21 days, and the blue roan under her the whole length of it, steady and sure and equal to everything asked of her, which was what you wanted from a horse and what you wanted from most things. She thought about Thomas at the pen rail when she came in. He had not run to meet her. He had been standing at the rail the way he stood at things, quietly and completely, and she had known as she rode the cattle through the gate that he had been there for a while, that he had come to the junction before the drive arrived, and she had found that she was glad of it. Glad in the specific way you are glad of something you had not known you wanted until it was there. She was not a woman who frightened easily, and she was not a woman who looked away from things that were true. What was true was this: she had come back to Copper Bend with nothing but a horse and $40, and the kind of certainty that comes from knowing what you are good at and being willing to prove it, and what had happened was not luck. It was Bjorn telling the truth about what he had seen. It was Thomas asking the question plain and straight, and hearing the answer without needing it decorated. It was the drive itself, which she had run the way she knew how to run it, one day at a time, and one decision at a time, and with the patience that cattle require when you want them to do something difficult, without losing them in the doing of it. 372 head, 21 days, inside the window. No one who had been there would forget it. She knew that. She also knew that she did not need them to. The drive had happened, and the proof of it was in the count, and the count was in the books at Clearwater Junction in the thin, careful handwriting of the man named Galt, and that was enough, though it was not nothing, she thought, that Thomas Kessler rode beside her in the snow without asking her to explain herself, or be grateful, or be anything other than what she already was. She looked at him. He was watching the road ahead. "You are good company on a ride," she said. He glanced at her. Something in his face shifted, not quite a smile. That thing before a smile. "So are you," he said. The snow came down straight and soft, and the road went white ahead of them, and the valley held them in the way that good country holds the people who know how to be in it, without insisting, without requiring, just there and solid and entirely itself. Thank you for riding this trail with Orla and Thomas and the Ridgeline crew. If the story meant something to you, I would be glad if you left a like and subscribed. These stories travel only as far as the people willing to carry them.